Hey there, this is Cindy, and I am so glad you joined us today, and I can't wait for you to hear today's episode. Just before we dive in, though, I wanted to share some ways that we can work together if you're looking to elevate your negotiation skills. If you're looking for personalized input, then my signature one-on-one mastermind or VIP experiences may be for you. Or I also have online or group programs available to help you better leverage your natural power to get more of what you want and deserve in life. So check out our website at artoffemininenegotiation.com if that sounds interesting to you. And now on to today's program, the reason you are here. So happy to introduce you today to Izzy Gesell. We're going to be talking about how to use improv skills and improv principles to improve your negotiations. So welcome, Izzy. It is so great to have you here.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited about the discussion about the application of these skills to negotiation and relationships, actually.
Yeah, and I am really excited about the conversation as well for our listeners out there. I had the pleasure of meeting Izzy in Clubhouse, and I can only say really unique and fresh improv-based perspectives always added such value to all of our negotiation rooms. No matter what the negotiation topic was, he always was able to seamlessly bring in these really profound principles centered around improv. And I just became more and more intrigued and impressed, both with the principles and how relevant they are to the art of negotiation, but also with Izzy himself. He just brings a fresh perspective with humor, with compassion, and always with grace. And I just knew I had to get him here on the show to share his insights with you. So Izzy, in terms of bio, for those of you who don't know him, he's an organizational alchemist. And I love that description of him. I think it's so apropos because he helps individuals and organizations transform their thinking from commonplace to extraordinary. And I've certainly seen him do that in every room I've seen him in. He does keynotes, training, coaching, facilitated sessions, and he offers these imaginative, intuitive, and immediately useful insights, as you will see in just a moment. And in fact, Izzy was one of the first to use improv theater concepts as tools for personal and organizational learning. So get out a pad and pen. You're going to want to take notes, or at the very least, listen to this episode a couple of times is my guess. So tell us first, Izzy, how did you first get into improv?
Well, the short story is that I was a special education teacher. That was my first career. I grew up and lived in New York City. I was a special ed teacher in New York for about 10 years. Wow. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I had this drive towards being a stand-up comedian. So I studied comedy. Comedy is structured. You can learn about the performance aspect and also the written aspect of it. And then first thing I found was that comedy and teaching are not that different.
Yeah.
and I'll just say, really, if you think about it, both are professions where individuals are on a stage platform with an audience of multiple interests, some of them who want to be there, some of them who don't. And in order to make it interesting for the audience, you have to be able to take on some characters and you have to make them relevant. You have to engage the audience in order to get your point across. And as I was transitioning, I was teaching at City University of New York, the Graduate Center in the Graduate School of Education. And in my field placement classes, I was seeing the people come in once a week and talk about not so much how do I teach the kids, but how do I deal with the other adults, and how do I deal with the parents, and how do I deal with the hecklers? A kid in class who's yelling at the teacher is essentially a heckler in so a nightclub room. You deal with them the same way. You don't go for the jugular right away. You sort of build up. So I began to see that the training that I had as a comedian and training that I had as a teacher had some overlap, and they both centered around who showed up, the person who showed up. If you think about the teachers in your history that you remember, most of them had some larger than life aspect to it.
Yeah.
You know, they were either characters or they were very, very focused. They were almost obsessive compulsive about things. So that's a character, you know, so that's one aspect. In my comedy world, I started taking improv classes because I was just very curious about that. And that's where I really had my eyes open to the understanding that comedy is about sending humor out, and it's a structured art form. Improv is a process-focused art form where you don't learn the outcome, but you learn how to step into different situations and be prepared for what comes towards you. And I guess it's 20 years ago now, I began to be involved with organizations wanting to know about humor in the workplace. So I brought my comedy process to organizations and then started doing my activities, the games that I was playing and learning about as team building exercises and stress management exercises. And then I would just say the thing that put them all together was the understanding that what I was now was a facilitator, that I was using a process to help people come to conclusions based on an outcome or a desired approach. That's the long story.
Well, no, and it's great because, and as you were speaking, Izzy, it was amazing because I was making connect, like when you did that comparison of comedy to teaching, which is brilliant, really insightful. And I was thinking even of my practice, my career as a lawyer, and I would say those same principles apply, right? I mean, you're showing up. Some people want to be there, some people don't. You're having to persuade and try and keep that engagement and be persuasive. And I think it's a really apt analogy to teaching, to the practice of law, to life, frankly. It really does apply across the board. So
without a doubt.
First make the connection and say, you've touched on that a little bit, but between improv and negotiation or leadership skills generally.
I began to notice that there was a difference between my comedy performance, my comedy mindset and my improv mindset. I was more confident as a comedian than as an improviser. And so I have this analytical internal mind. And I'm thinking, what's the difference? Because most people would think comedy is the hardest thing they want to do, they're ever going to do. And improv may be harder for some and easier for other. Comedy was by myself. I had control. If I was really doing poorly, eventually I could say, well, I'm done, because they don't know what it goes. But in improv, I was part of a team. I had responsibility both as a leader and a follower. And that's one of the things about improv. You learn to be both. When it's your turn, you're the leader. People have to follow whatever you say. When it's their turn, the yes and approach is I have to, even though I may not agree with you, I accept or acknowledge the fact that that's what I got. I wasn't expecting it, but that's what you gave me. And I've made the commitment to be part of this team. And that's where I began to see that the improv universe was relevant to the team building organizational universe, in that a leader is someone who makes the offers and inspires people, and other people follow them in working together.
It is such a great simile for life, right? I mean, it is like it applies teaching. I hadn't even thought of it until you said it. As I said, the practice of law, negotiation, just so relevant. How we show up in our relationships. I mean, really, you could not go wrong following those improv principles. And if you can dig just a little bit, like yes and, I know is a really fundamental aspect of improv, but for our listeners out there who may not know what that means, can you tell us what that yes and concept is?
Yes and is shorthand for a basic principle of improv, which is yes is I'll accept what you say and give me. So, when you're in the audience in an improv, the group will ask, give us a title of a person, what's their relationship, where are they, and they've come up with a problem. What's the problem? And whatever they say, the improvisers goes, okay, yes, we're going to use that, and here's here's the way we do it. This is very different. And again, one of the negotiation connections that I think is really key is the difference between yes and yes but.
Yes, absolutely.
So yes and means I can have a difference of opinion without you being wrong. Yeah, you want that and I want this. So let's look at why we have different opinions, as opposed to, yes, you want this, but I want this. So one of us has to give in.
It's such a subtle difference, but so profound, that but word. One of them opens doors, the other one closes doors. One of them gives us the possibility to work together, the other one pits us against each other. I mean, that one
exactly
word, so
it's
powerful.
Emotional response. When I do my workshops, I ask the folks at this point, in a situation that has some emotional aspect, it's not necessarily true with your friends, your family, your brothers, your sisters. You can butt them all the time. But negotiation in other situations have an emotional reaction to it because of status.
Yeah.
You're either feeling lower or you're feeling higher, or you're feeling weaker or stronger. So the but has an emotional component. When I ask folks, if you're talking to your boss and they tell you how great that you are, and then they say, but there's one thing I want to talk to you about. People, what's your response? Oh, I felt put down. I felt hurt. I felt combative. Those are emotional responses.
Yeah. Yeah. That but seems to, for most people, that emotional response is the but negates all of the good that came before it. Right.
Yes.
And I'd actually invite you to, because it's interesting to me that you said it's different in your personal relationships with your family, because that's one area that I've really been trying to get much more intentional about, because I think we do allow ourselves latitude in our personal relationships, and yet those same principles actually apply, right? Like if you want the best intimate relationship or the best relationship with your kids, getting more intentional about bringing that yes and mindset to those relationships as well, I think can be just a huge game changer. What are your thoughts on that, Izzy?
Especially with the family. Certainly it's true with the organization too, but in the family, if you have these discussions, so let's say you're playing some improv games, and families play improv games all the time. They do them in car trips, the one-word stories, and let's make up, who what's the story behind those people at the other picnic table, who are they? Those are all improv games, essentially.
Yeah.
If you could use the learning opportunities to point out to your kids, to your siblings, to your parents, look at how difference is between yes and yes but.
Yeah.
And if we know we're going to disagree, so let's make a standard where we're going to use yes and, so that both sides can be heard.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
becomes a dialogue rather than a win-lose situation.
Yeah. And I think particularly powerful with family, because for most people, or maybe I just have a very dysfunctional family growing up, but there are so many more triggers often in our family dynamics than there are in those third-party relationships. So
because the emotions have been quashed down and our roles are much more flexible. At work, we're pretty clear in our roles.
yeah.
In families, there's a lot of stuff that's under the radar. So there's the passive aggressive thing,
Yeah.
there's the deflection, there's the hormonal stuff, there's the gender differences. There's all kinds of things below it. So the idea would be to let's establish a process where we can accommodate the differences to reach, again, and essentially it's negotiation. We may have different positions, but we have the same goal.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, such a big difference. And you'd mentioned about sort of games that we play as a family. I know you're the author of Playing Along, group learning activities borrowed from Improv Theater. I'd love if you could share with us maybe just a few of your favorite group activities and explain how they help, why you use them or recommend them.
Sure. I really like a game that's called One Word Story. I don't know if you've had a chance to play, but why don't you and I play this? You and I are going to tell a story that's never been played before. Okay. We're going to do this one word at a time, back and forth. My experience is neither of us will know where it goes. We can't really predict, nor can we control the other person's word. Yeah. So it's really a matter of staying present and doing a yes and suspending judgment. That's another connection to the negotiation piece. Is suspend judgment, because the process unfolds with many different things. So
great. Just before we do, I just want to put a pin in that for our listeners, because I think that is such an important point you just made. And you just dropped them so casually, but that suspending judgment piece. I have seen more negotiations fail because people come with that attachment, that judgment based on particular expected outcomes, and they miss gorgeous opportunities that are lying right there on the table between them had they just suspended judgment about it. So just want
right. And that's a very hard thing to do. So one of the benefits of using improv in relationships and life and negotiations is that you play these games, and when you notice you're judging or anticipating, and then you get thrown off track, it's an opportunity to discuss it and sort of say, well, what can I learn from this? And maybe what I'm going to learn is, if I am in the negotiation, or if I'm with my client or with my kid, and I'm finding the judgment, this is bad for her, she's going to be in danger, I'm going to recognize it, and I'm going to say, whoa, step back.
Yeah.
And let's go a little further with this story. And that's why this game, one word at a time, is so helpful, because the idea is always to go forward.
I've never played this. I'll tell you, we used to do
Okay.
it with the kids where we do a sentence each, which is
Yeah.
easier. I suspect this is a little more challenging. So
Well, they both have their challenges and opportunities.
Okay.
The comment about would be easier is a judgment.
Yeah.
So right there, you're
call.
making a judgment
Yeah.
about something that you've never experienced, but
Yeah.
you assume
Yeah.
that it's harder than what you know.
Yeah, telling myself a story, and that's
Telling
ironic.
yourself
And
a
thank
story.
you for calling me on that, because then I'm imposing a limiting belief before we even said word one. So good call.
You're also, so again, the beauty, and I would say the reason I love this is that all we have to do is teach ourselves to pay attention to what happens in the games, the
Yeah.
lead up to the games, and then just sort of say, oh, my curiosity is, we were just talking about judgment and I heard a judgment, so I'm just going to bring it out.
Yeah, so good. And curiosity,
Yeah.
I love that word, Izzy. I think it's so important in negotiations. Show
Yeah.
up with curiosity. Such a great lesson. All right.
All right. So what I do is I'll ask a group to somebody call out a title, or if we're on Zoom, a title of a story that's never been told before into the chat. Either you can call something out or I can call something out.
You go
My
ahead.
suggestion to you is, all right, let's do the story of the magic file folder, because I see a file folder. Do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
You go and I'll take your lead.
Once
There
was
a
desk
in
my
office
period. When
I
noticed
that
there
was
an
unexpected
folder
sitting
right
before
my
eyes,
period. When
I
picked
it,
up,
I
felt
anxious
because
to
genies
floated
right
out
of
the
folder, period, the end. Let's pause right here.
That's hilarious. I love that. I'm gonna practice that with the kids at dinner tonight. I think that's fabulous.
Oh, for sure. So then the question is, and let's go over the experience. So what was that like for you? And let me suggest that you think about from the time you agreed to play the game with me,
Yeah,
till now. Just give us a sense of where your self-talk, where your mind went.
yeah. I think it's so beautiful for negotiations, because I being very transparent, there was that combination of a little excitement but anxiousness, right? A little performance anxiety, a little all of the questions, those stories that we start to immediately tell ourselves, those expectations, and a lot of those fears that we have, that fear of being judged, fear of failure, fear of, missing out, fear, all of these things, like really quickly, rapid fast, but start coming. And that, I think, is most people's experience when you're showing up in a negotiation or any potentially difficult conversation. That jumbled mix of emotions, the anticipation and the excitement and the hopefulness, but blended with a healthy dose of a lot of feelings that don't serve.
What was the game playing experience like for you?
I enjoyed it. I felt like I was too slow, right? So
say more about that. What gave you that data?
And nothing no feedback from you whatsoever. You're super gracious as always, but and again, a story I'm telling myself, but there was that feeling like, okay, I should be having this flow as if we were one person speaking naturally. And it was those hesitations, just rather than coming up with the immediate first word that came to mind. So there was a certain inner critic judging myself even as I was participating.
Yeah. And if you think about negotiations, very often we go into negotiations feeling, and one of the things that comes up is that it would make sense that, because I've done this a lot, and this is the first time you've ever done it, you may be in this situation thinking, I'm never going to be that good, or I really have to really show, because I have to do it really fast. And I purposely did not say that there was a time pressure within which you had to answer.
Yep.
So the consent and the boundaries we didn't say that everything has to come up in 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
We put our own limitations on because of our status and feeling. And that's very much what happens in a negotiation.
Such a valuable lesson from that. I love that. So many lessons on that.
Can I tell you a story about this particular
please
thing?
do. Absolutely.
I was in a workshop. I was leading a workshop, and I play this game a lot. This is usually the first or second game I play because it contains a lot of the basic principles. It's pretty easy, and the discussion is usually very ripe. And most of the time when people end, they do what we did, which is laugh. They'll high five each other, and this is a group of 4 or 5 people sitting at a table, and they were going around telling the story. And I asked, how was it? And a woman raised her hand and said, I wasn't very good. Well, why not? She says, well, I didn't answer fast enough. And I said, well, I consciously, particularly did not give you a time limit. And in fact, there was no time limit.
Yeah.
In fact, I said, there is no time limit. And she said, exact words, I heard you but I didn't believe you because nothing in my life has no time pressure to it.
Wow.
And then I could see the light bulb go off. She said, oh my goodness. Now I realize why my direct reports are so nervous when I come into the room. Wow. What she realized was that she carries a sense of urgency around with her, even when it's not necessary. And that emanates from her because who we are when we show up, this is from my leadership work, who we are as we show up impacts the emotions consciously and unconsciously of the people. So, the idea is that in the game, you can see yourselves in a way that we lose our defensiveness, can be honest, and then our intellect says, well, what can I learn from this?
And what a powerful insight or epiphany for her. And it's easier, I think, to be vulnerable when we're talking about it in the context of a game, which makes the exercise even more powerful.
The game has no real world consequence.
Yes. Yes.
So you can take as many risks as you want. Yeah.
And even in terms of discussing your experience of it.
It's about the game. It's not me. It's about the game. And then you go, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
It was me.
Through that, you can then translate them to really profound life experiences about how we show up in our relationships, in our workplace, in our negotiations. So good.
Exactly. And the facilitation then is, what can you do? What can you take away from this game experience or any game experience, whether you're playing cards with your niece and nephew, whether you're in Las Vegas, whether you're doing improv? What can you take away from the way you play that will inform you about how you are in regular situations?
Oh, so good, Izzy. So powerful. Now, I know you also have video courses available, I think, on LinkedIn Learning.
Yes.
One of them is about humor in the workplace. So I'd love if you could share some tips on how humor can be an important skill, whether at work or beyond, frankly.
It's certainly an underutilized skill because it's misunderstood. We don't teach about humor.
Yeah.
What I learned about humor from certainly the comedy is one aspect of humor. Humor itself is a way that human beings are able to deal with the world. If you think about operating room humor, gallows humor, dark humor, political cartoons, there's humor about situations that run the gamut. The class on LinkedIn, it's called Humor in the Workplace. And one of the things that I focus on is the uses of humor in our lives. And that was surprising to me, not that it exists, but that we aren't aware of it. Yeah. Because we'll say things, and if people get offended or they don't laugh, we go, just kidding. Yeah. Supposedly say, well, it didn't have, but just kidding does not mean I did not mean what I said.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we say, oh, you gained some weight, what? I was just kidding,
You get out of jail free card.
Well, for a long time it was, and in negotiation or in the workplace, it was very much the fault of the receiver.
Yes.
Oh, you can't take a joke.
Yeah.
It turns out it's not your responsibility to take somebody else's joke.
Yeah.
It's an aggression because, and here's for the 4 ways we use humor in our lives, and they're very relevant to the workplace. One is as a shield. We use humor to protect ourselves. Yeah. Self-deprecating humor. We laugh at ourselves before others can make fun of it about something we already feel vulnerable about.
Sure.
So if we do it first, if our family we can do it. The second function of humor is as a weapon. Sarcasm, put down humor. We make fun of someone in order to put them down.
Yeah.
And that is a status thing. So we make fun of things that scare us.
Yeah.
Because we want to limit the belief, and that's the other. So the weapon piece, and if you think of the phrases we use, stuck it to them, left them speechless, had the last word.
Yeah,
those are aggressive. Those are aggressive phrases. Yeah. Oh, you can't take a joke.
Yeah.
Or you can't take a stabbing. It's basically the same thing. Yeah. I'm bleeding. Now that we have microaggressions and regular aggressions, and the responsibility is in the culture of the organization, I think you get that in negotiation also. There are people who use their power, and then if it's misconstrued, they'll say, I was just kidding, or you can't take a joke. But their truth is in trying to be bullies.
Yeah.
Trying to be bullies. The third function is the bridge. We laugh together because we've shared the same experience.
Nice.
That's the powerfulness. So the laugh we did at the end of One Word at a Time was a bridge. We were connected. We went through the same process. We struggled together. Yeah. And finally, the fourth one is as a spotlight. Humor has the ability to distract people. So if there's a serious subject or something that makes you uncomfortable, if you try to make a joke, you break the tension. Mm-hmm. And there's also people who will distract from, they are narcissists in some level. They will just keep making jokes, funny or not, so that everybody has to look at them.
Yes. Yes. And we do see these show up, as you were saying this, Izzy, like, my gosh, are these show up? You could do a mini lesson on negotiation just on those 4 uses of humor, frankly, right? The bridge. And it sort of goes to the old, what I would call the more traditional conditioning around competitive model of negotiating, that win or lose, versus a more collaborative approach. In the first one, you're going to see that using it as a weapon. You're going to see that potential narcissistic kind of use of it to get the attention back, versus on the collaborative model, being able to use it as a bridge. And even that self-deprecating humor is a way to build connection, right? To build that trust.
It can build connection up to a point. Yeah. Because if you do it too much, you're belittling yourself, and people get uncomfortable. Yeah. The weapon piece in negotiation, and just say in any relationships or where people are testing each other, one of the functions is, and again, if this is on equal status kind of situations, somebody will make a sarcastic joke or say something to see if they can get a rise out of the other person. If the other person responds, gives back, then we know we're in an equal fight. Yeah. They're not, but if that person gives in right away or starts whining and crying, that's information.
Yeah.
That this person is very vulnerable to this kind of assault. Yeah. And that's power in negotiation.
That's interesting. Yeah. And that source of information, using it as testing the waters as a source of information, because skilled negotiators will do precisely that. And their observation skills are so high. They're watching specifically for those kind of reactions versus somebody who's just blindly kind of going along, hoping to sort of keep their head above water.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I know one of your other courses is leading with applied improv.
Leading with applied improv, yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about how our listeners can do that. Like, how do you lead? How can you use applied improv in leadership? And I know you alluded a little bit earlier to that, but.
The title of the course that I teach about leadership is usually called Becoming the Leader You'd Like to Follow.
Nice.
And it's really about who shows up in your presence. How do you show up? Because improv is such a boon to self-reflection and understanding that you can work out a lot of your fears or uncertainties through the improv that will bring you into a different person. So this woman in the story that we told, she now realizes that she's different now when she walks in.
Yeah.
Because if she's feeling urgent, I would imagine, I haven't talked to her much, but that she would sit down. Maybe she's breathing. Maybe she took meditation classes. Who knows? Yeah. So her impact is different. The leading with applied improv. So let's say, so the first game, the way I start that program is make some kind of discussion about theory and say, let's play. I'm going to demonstrate a game. I need a volunteer. And the game I'm going to play is one word at a time, but they don't know that.
Yeah.
Ask for volunteer. I say, you don't have to volunteer if you don't want to. And I really mean that. But I do need somebody. Eventually somebody comes up.
Yeah.
They give a round of applause.
Yeah.
I ask them to hold on for a minute. And I ask the group, what kept your hand from going up? Because it's all about self-talk.
Yeah.
Just like negotiation, leadership is about self-talk. Well, I didn't want to look foolish. I don't know what I'm getting myself into. I was taught never to volunteer, let somebody else do it. Perfectly right. When you saw that she had volunteered pointing to the, how did you feel? What do you think people say? Relief. Everybody's relief. Oh, yay for her. You know? And this is where I make the point, and this is like 5 minutes into the program. This is a leadership action. And why did you volunteer? Most of the time, I'm here to learn. I want to take some risks. Sometimes I say to help the other people. Most of the time, they have their own reason.
Yeah.
It's a leadership action because she did it for her own reason. Yeah. But here's the leadership action. Her action had the power to change the emotional climate for the other people in the room. They felt relieved.
Yeah. And
the lesson is so the leadership lesson is not so much about what you do, i.e. step up, as how what you do makes other people feel. Yeah.
Oh, so profound, so beautiful. I love that.
And that's the leadership aspect.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, and as you properly pointed out as well, that applies to negotiations. That applies to how you show up in business. That applies to how you show up in your relationships. And I know we talked earlier about triggers in the context, whether at family or work. How can applied improv be used to help you sort of understand your triggers maybe a little better? It's because I'm beginning more and more, even as we talk, to see the power of the self-reflection aspects of it, but also to actually diffuse those triggers when you're in a situation.
That requires a parallel process of learning of how you do it. So it might be, I've been talking and taking a positive intelligence training. So it's very much about what's your method for changing your negative self-talk to positive? Yeah. What's your process for setting and achieving goals in your life? Yeah. So what the improv does is it essentially shines the light on the situation. The more you practice, you go from unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence. Yeah. You begin to feel confident. You don't have to know every answer. You can say, okay, I'll deal with it when it comes up. You're more confident yourself. Yeah. You're more risk aware. Yeah. And that makes you less risk averse. Yes.
Yeah, which is ironic, but so true. It seems counterintuitive, but it is absolutely the case.
That is absolutely true. You know, our risk, we catastrophize very much. We anticipate the improv lessons, improvisers who are successful, the skills are, they stay in the moment. Yeah. You know, every activity, the past is gone, the future is unknown. Now is all we got. Yeah. That's where we have to act.
I love that point about the risk aversion. I think that was really profound on that, because it's true in negotiations in particular. I mean, people so often are afraid to be able to take those chances and put themselves out there, but that's almost always where the power lies, right? That's where those creative opportunities are. That's where those gorgeous sort of win-win solutions come beyond the expectations of either party. And definitely when I teach, with my clients, one of the things we really work on is that worry piece, right? It's such a wasted emotion. And for a lot of clients, and people are like, why would you do that if they're about to go into a big negotiation? But I have what are the worst case scenarios for you? Because it's that fear of the unknown that causes reactivity. When you think about what the worst things are that can happen, takes a sting out of it. And then you can relax and show up as a better version of yourself. So
as you were talking, I just got an insight I hadn't had before. It's not so much the fear of the unknown, it's the fear of the assumption. Yeah. We can only project onto our biggest fear. Yeah. So that's what we think is going to happen. And that is false. It's like when the phone rings in the middle of the night, 99.9% of the time in our life, it's been a wrong number, right? But nobody wakes up going, wrong number. Like, wrong number. So who died or what's wrong?
Somebody died, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So we're somehow wired for that false belief that if we insulate ourselves from the risk, then we're safe. And we may be safe in a way, but the risk is rarely as debilitating as we might fear.
Yeah. And it's not safe, because debilitating is exactly the word. We are having adrenal overload all the time in this, fight or flight response about
Yeah.
things that, as you say, 99% of the time are never going to come to pass. And even in the 1% where they do, having thought about it without all of the destructive, allows us to show up and handle it with grace, or at
You
least,
deal with it.
right?
You deal. And if you have the confidence to know that even though you may not know what happens,
Yeah.
you'll be able to get through it.
Yeah.
That itself is a big
Yeah.
deal. And that's one of the leadership aspects.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And that's why I have my clients go through, what's the worst thing that you're worried
That's
is
the
going to
worst.
happen in this
Yeah.
negotiation? And if it does, what are your options to deal with it? And then they're like, oh, you know what? This isn't so bad, because you recognize you have options. Now, you had
Exactly.
some really interesting insights on, I'm at risk of saying it because it's just been so overplayed, but the slap heard around the world. And the other day in Clubhouse, you had some beautiful insights on impact versus intention. I'd love if you could share that with our listeners here today.
That's one of the challenges. This is one of the things I've learned from the humor work, or actually, and the improv work also, because intention doesn't always equal impact.
Yeah.
And it used to be that we said, well, I meant well, or I wanted to help you. And the impact was, I feel bad, or I don't want help. In this case, with the slap, the first thing Chris Rock said was, it was a joke.
Yeah.
My intent was a joke. And what Will Smith says was, it was an insult.
Yeah.
The impact was insulting. The intention was humor.
Yeah.
Understanding that intention does not always equal impact.
Yeah.
And with humor especially, but also in many kinds of communication, your intention, and if we go into negotiation, it's all about intention and storytelling, right? It's like, how are we going to craft the story?
Yeah.
In this case, the recognition that the responsibility, humor is never going to work all the time. And when I do coaching on humor and performance and leadership, very often business people will say, how can I make sure that my jokes will always get laughed at?
Yeah.
And you can't. And then, won't it make me look silly and less serious? And I said, no, it won't, because if you don't have any sense of humor, you're seen as solemn and distant. Humor and seriousness go together. Yeah. So I think that intention and impact was really a revelation to me.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a beautiful approach to it. And also the idea about perspective, right? I mean, depending at which I think is similar to intention, right? One person intended it, or the perspective was, this is going to be received as humor, and the other person's perspective was very different, right? And even we saw Will Smith's perspective shift. I mean, he did laugh and see it as humorous at first, clearly, and it's sometimes the ripple effect of other people's intentions, which impact rather, which happens in negotiations. I've seen that countless times as well, where somebody has very positive reaction to something. They look down the table, or they see a look, or they get a particular feeling, and suddenly things go sideways really quick.
Yeah. Or they try a joke and something humorous, and if they don't get the response, they realize that the intention was not the impact.
Yeah.
They wanted to build rapport, and they actually had the opposite.
Yeah.
So watching it is really insightful for folks.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you unpacked it, right? I think the more people, because instead of just everybody was sort of stewing in the drama of it. And I think there was all kinds of really positive lessons that we could take away from it, right? Even that pause, taking that moment to pause and reflect before, between a stimulus and response, you've got that pause, taking advantage of negotiating with ourselves about how you want to show up. Some of the things you've talked about here today, Izzy, I think there are some really powerful lessons from any of these life incidents that we see. So
I think so. Yeah. And humor is very much about focus, a point of view, depending on what you look at. So sometimes it's possible, and very often it's possible, for you to tell a humorous story or joke, and the punchline is the point of view, and other people will identify with somebody else in the story. Yeah. Or humor always has a target. Yeah. So depending on who identifies with what target, you either are funny or not. As a comedian, as a humorist, the same joke that I've told to many people who find it funny, sometimes people will not laugh.
Yeah, no, it'll depend on your audience.
It's not the joke. It's the negotiation. You know.
And
You know, people come to you, and people have a high expectation for humor. If you go to somebody and say, I'm going to make you laugh, people go, you better.
Yeah.
You know,
True.
I can't tell you how many times, I can't tell you how many times as a keynoter, I'd be at a conference and I'm getting ready to go on and somebody says, I heard you're a humorist. Yeah, you better be funny. You know, it's like,
Yeah, no pressure at all.
but it's an expectation. It's such a desired trait.
Yeah.
It's such a desired experience that if somebody is projecting themselves that way,
Yeah.
the anticipation is high and the letdown could be high also.
But also a great negotiating lesson. I mean, definitely for humor, but even outside, frankly, any quality, any trait, any expectation or prejudgment that we put either on the issues that are on the table or the people that we're negotiating with can profoundly affect how people show up, right? Because, and not even in response to, but in anticipation. I think that's an excellent point you just raised there. We can shift the dynamic of a negotiation before it even starts just by our expectations and anticipation of what we're going to be facing. So
who you are, who shows up in your presence impacts the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's true in negotiation. And that's why some, you know, there are people who come in wanting to own the room. There are people wanting to develop some kind of rapport, and that impacts the way people see each other.
Yeah. Now, do you have any advice or tips, and not to put you on the stuff that's coming out of left field? I don't know what made me think of it. Maybe the slap, although it's not really a bullying situation, but what advice or tips do you have for negotiating with bullies or people with more power, in particular, if there are improv principles that would apply to help that?
One of the principles is using a yes and. You said that, and my response was, I felt negative. Mm-hmm. Could you tell me, let's talk a little bit more. Can I tell you how I felt?
Yeah.
Or can you tell me, you said that and I was thrown a little bit off. Could you tell me a little bit about how you came to that conclusion? So using the yes and to continue the dialogue rather than trying to win or lose.
Yeah.
There's also a point where the bully can only succeed while you stay to be bullied.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so in negotiation, and it could be simple negotiation, like, let's have a meeting. I want to talk to you. Well, I'd love to talk to you. I'm really busy now. Can we meet in an hour?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we meet tomorrow? No, I can't. It's got to be right now. Well, I have this project that if you want me to put it aside, would you tell my boss that you want to see me now? So you can negotiate without giving up, without having to. The other improv approach is very much about curiosity about what's going on, and recognizing if you're feeling on the back foot, if you're feeling off kilter, then that's something to prepare for before you go into the negotiation. Yeah. This is a person who's going to try to stampede me. How are we going to deal with that? So you anticipate as much as you can, and then come up with options.
Oh, and
that's what improv is: options, choices.
Yeah, so good. And the preparation piece, because it's so often forgotten. People just show up, even it amazes me sometimes, even for high stakes negotiations, or they just prepare on their data, but they don't prepare for how might the other side show up? And if they show up in these various versions, how will I respond to that? Who do I want to show up as, right? Considering all of those other elements as part of your preparation process can be
that's why storytelling, and we can maybe do another podcast on storytelling for negotiation. I have a video with colleague Joey Novak, who's an attorney, on trial guides on mediation, improv and mediation.
Nice.
And I've just finished one on storytelling that was still trying to get going. But the storytelling piece is really key in this, and that's what you can prepare for.
Yeah.
Is different outcomes, just like we did.
Yeah. And I am taking you up on that offer about coming back for storytelling, because I actually think there's tremendous power, underutilized power in storytelling in the context of negotiations, and to improve relationships, to build that trust, to get that better buy-in, those longer lasting agreements, those more, creative outcomes. I think storytelling can go a long way to helping with all of that. So
negotiations and trials are nothing but stories from different perspectives.
Yes, such a
and understanding how the thing about storytelling is that stories affect the brain differently than data.
Yeah.
And because stories are about cause and effect, juries, witnesses, negotiators, they respond to it differently than data.
Yeah. Yeah.
So knowing how to maneuver the story is essentially what a negotiation is about.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And in the practice of law, I think it was one of the things that did make me different. And I wasn't even intentional about it. It just came naturally to me. I think growing up in sort of a low rental apartment, a very different background, I just always told stories I drive the lawyer on the other side crazy because they're all about the data, all about the facts, making this rigid legal argument. And I'd be drawing in examples of my kids and they're like, why are we hearing about Ms. Watson's kids? It was just, but it was effective because the adjudicator, it personalized the process in a way that more analytical approach didn't. So I totally
and it highlighted the rest of your data arguments because it put them into context. They understood how you arrived at it or who arrived at it. And so the data, which is essentially just by itself, it means nothing without the story attached to it.
Yeah, it brought humanity to the process. And ultimately, isn't that what all of this is about, right? I mean, what does any of it matter without our humanity? So
yeah.
Well, Izzy, this has been fantastic. And I know
I loved it. Yeah, it was great.
And I normally like to end by asking, what is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Again, it doesn't have to be about improv or even negotiation, just one of those moments where you looked at things differently and it shifted how you thought about things or showed up.
I'll share with you a quote that my comedy writing teacher gave me. Really has changed me, and I've kept it for many years. I was writing, I was in a class, and I was writing pretty well, but I was afraid to go up on stage. And I said to him, how do you overcome your fear of getting up on stage? And he said, you don't overcome your fear. You bring it with you. That's what people are interested in.
Oh, nice. Wow.
And what that did for me is recognize why I was so cynical at motivational speakers, because all these people would come out and tell me how successful they were. Yeah. And, the one day they were up 500 pounds and then they decided not to be fat and they stopped eating. And then next month they were 200 pounds. And I'm going, well, that's you, not me. Yeah. The struggle, the hero's journey is what people are interested in. Yeah. And that changed that changed the whole way that I relate to people and myself.
That was such great advice. I love that. And it's so popular now because, growing up is always that stiff upper lip. You shot to put out perfection, an image of perfection, whether it was real or not. And now people are leaning into that vulnerability piece, right? And recognizing the power in it. So. And
as leaders or negotiators, showing vulnerability is an asset. I think it connects people, whether that works or not. That's up to the rest of the negotiation.
Yeah, no, I agree. What a beautiful note to end on. So thanks again, Izzy. This has been so much fun. I just love your insights always, and you have delivered in spades. So thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And for our listeners out there, make sure to check out Izzy as well. You can find him, check out his website at izzyg.com. Check him out on LinkedIn as well. He writes some profound stuff. He did a fabulous piece on LinkedIn actually about the slap incident. So make sure to check that out. Check him out. His programs, we'll make sure to have links in our show notes as well for you so that you can check out some of those programs for yourself personally or for your organization. And I'm sure you all just got lots and lots of value from this episode. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already done that, and share the podcast with people that you think could benefit. And I encourage you to definitely share this episode in particular. Heck, go back and watch it again and take notes. There are all kinds of gems. And I think the more times you listen to this baby, the more gems you're going to find hidden layer upon layer. And make sure to join our Women on Purpose community group. If you haven't done that yet, just go to Facebook groups and look for Women on Purpose community. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, take care.